Okay, awesome. Welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. It's cold, it's the longest night of the year, so I appreciate it. Sorry. Okay. So we struggle getting speakers. Fortunately, speakers don't want to come up when it's cold and dark, so I normally help organize this thing with Jerry and Len, who's dealing with an operations issue. It seems to be that type of year. And so I'm going to be filling in tonight. So you're going to have to listen to me. Well, I suppose you don't have to listen to me for an hour about Polymer, but I'm going to be talking about Polymer for an hour. And it's up to you to stop me and ask questions. And there's going to be lots of code. I have no slides. I'm really sorry. So if you don't like to see lots of typing and coding and making mistakes, I'm sorry. But then if you keep sharp, I think you can learn something cool. There's some cool stuff coming down the pipe. So I'm going to be talking about Polymer, and particularly the Polymer PWA Starter Kit, which is a lot of words, and it says a lot, and it doesn't really say very much about what it's a lot about. Anyway, so let's get started with Polymer itself. So let's close this window and go to Polymer. So Polymer 3 is the foundation of all of this, and as some of you may know, it was launched at Google I/O last month. And Polymer 3 is a weird one because it's yay awesome. We've just launched a new version of our framework, and they're immediately talking about welcome to the future. This is what we're doing next, and this is what you should be interested in. This is our roadmap. And there's a part of that that jars with our understanding. But what you must remember about the Polymer project is that it's not just a framework. It's trying to push the platform as a whole forward, right? So let's unpack a little bit about what they did with Polymer 3. So what they did with Polymer 3 is try and make it a lot less weird and a lot more componentized. So less weird in the sense that they didn't want to use Bower and they didn't want to use HTML imports, which are not on the standardization path at the moment. And they wanted to cut all of that stuff so that you could use NPM and you could use normal JavaScript modules and write in a way that everything else was being written, the de facto standards, as well as break apart this idea of Polymer being a monolithic framework. Okay, so they wrote a lot of mix-ins and little bits and pieces that you can opt into using, which is cool. And I think what's really interesting is where that led to. So late last year, in conjunction with this and their rapid development for Polymer 3, they embarked on an experiment called LitHTML. And LitHTML is a way to try and create a really, really fast and extensible platform rendering, or platform native rendering framework, right? So to use the features that the platform has to do something that quite honestly gives you the kind of expressiveness that React has. And the way that they did this is with template literals, okay? And particularly tag template literals. So how many people know what template literals are? Okay, yay, awesome. How many people know what tag template literals are? Okay, so it's the ability to pass a function to a template literal, tagging it, and you can then operate on that template literal in the bits and pieces. Okay, so perhaps I can take the moment to just show you what I mean by that. So if we talk about a template or a literal being something like, let's say we've got the let name equals world, right? And we've got this template literal, which we're going to say is going to interpolate, and the string is going to be hello, and then we're going to put whatever name is in there. Okay. Now, if we were to go and document.body.inner HTML equals what, and then run this code, I'm just going to run using LitHTML, or Light server, sorry. You'll see that we would render hello world to whatever the document body is, right? Which is very, very cool. But and this is standard, and this I think was sort of standardized as a part of ES 2015, so relatively old actually. But there was a feature in this that is really went unnoticed largely until now, which is the ability to add a tag. And what the tag is let's do let blah is a function that will take the string bits and an array of the data bits, right? So let's just call them other bits, other points, other bits, and let you operate on them. So what you can do is you can do something, and I'm going to be really, really simple here. Just do a console.log of the string bits and a console.log of the other bits to show you what I mean. And in here, I'm also just going to add
console.log.
Thank you very much. Hey, this is going to be a great evening if you're all paying this much attention. Let's just go number, new date, which is just going to give us the number of milliseconds since epoch in a very simple manner. Okay. And when we do that, firstly you'll see that it updates properly. And if we take a look at the console, over here. Oh, sorry, I missed the part. So I didn't actually use the tag. And how you use the tag is like as follows. Putting it at the front of the template literal. Okay. Now what that gives us, gave us undefined, is I forgot to return something. So return something. This part is really derpy because I only thought of it at 4 o'clock, so I'm really sorry. Okay, so something, and you can see that we get 2 bits of information. So firstly it logs all of the individual string components that represent all of the static stuff in the template literal and all of the data bits and pieces. Now, the attentive of you might think, well, I could use that data to build something meaningful about the structure of this. Okay? And if you were to put HTML in there, you could start doing meaningful things with the HTML bits and pieces. And this is where LitHTML enters the equation. Because it uses this fundamental premise of being able to build up this tree of the bits and pieces that don't change in a page and the bits and pieces that do change in a page and efficiently update those. So it turns out JavaScript is insanely efficient at string processing, much more than anything else, definitely better than arithmetic. And doing this on HTML stuff is really, really valuable. So let's throw some of this away. I'm just going to comment it out. That's not going to work. Sorry, I'm just going to comment that. Range, comment that. And do with the import, right? So I'm just going to import HTML and render from lit extended, and then I get to do some cool stuff, okay? So I get to, for example's sake, change what into a function that's going to take name, and it's going to return a tag template literal called HTML that's going to do the following. So it's going to render an H1, and in the H1 it's going to take name, and then it's going to do this at the end of the H1. Damn it. When even the copying and pasting is difficult, you know it's going to be a long demo, okay? Okay. And then we get the ability to call a method called render, and we're going to render this what with name. Let's go what world. Let's get rid of that one as well. And we're going to render it to the document. Sorry? Is it dot body? It is dot body. Jerry's sitting in front, you can be honest. Well, but I put hello. I didn't even put hello. Oops. Just cut to the quick, eh? Hello. I promise I type better than this normally. Okay, so there we go. And this lets us do some cool things, right? So let's set interval. And it lets us, let's do every 100 milliseconds. Has that done the right thing? Oh. It has to be a function, right? Set interval takes a callback. So set interval every 100 milliseconds. Extra bracket. Every 100 milliseconds is going to render. And we see it rendering there. And in fact, you can go and do it a lot more aggressively. And I think that's the point, right? JavaScript's really fast at string manipulation, and it can then take this and render something really, really quickly. Now, an important caveat to remember about LitHTML, let me just kill this. An important caveat to remember is that this HTML doesn't return a string, it returns a HTML element tree. Okay? So it's not just string manipulation, it's taking the strings and doing something else with it. And I'm going to close this because that's the foundation of the rendering bits and pieces. So looking at this really, really exciting development, the Polymer team was like, yeah, cool, that's awesome, we want to do that, and we want to use the bits and pieces from our web component framework to make sense with it. So obviously our bespoke rendering engine doesn't make sense anymore. Yeah?
Can you go back? Why don't you need brackets when using templates? Like you said, HTML and then just the accent key thing without brackets. I feel like there's brackets missing.
And I completely understand it. That's because it's passing the function to the template literal rather than passing the template literal to the function, sort of. It's the way that the standard works, right?
Okay.
They designed it like that so that you could start writing. You don't even need to have them consecutive. You can have it spaced, and then you can have them nested inside one another. So it's designed for DSL functionality. Have you ever written any Ruby DSLs? Anyone? Okay, so Ruby has very similar stuff where it omits some of the ceremony to let you write cool DSLs. The reason I thought of that is because, well, JavaScript's really fast at strings, so DSL functionality would be cool, right? And it took them 3 years to find something meaningful to use it for. Anyway, now, the reason why I bring this up is not necessarily for lit itself, right? But it's the next part. It's taking the web component polyfills, it's taking the property change identifiers and property handling identifiers for the web components, and then LitHTML, and combining those into something called LitElement. Okay? And I took it away too quickly, but it was on that home page. And that's the foundation of what we're going to look at as a part of the starter kit, is how to use LitElement to start building meaningful web components in a way that we're used to, either from a React or somewhat of an Angular way. Who's familiar with React? Who's done a bunch of React work? So some of this will look close to what you're used to from an aesthetic perspective at the very least. Okay, so that's lit, tag template literals, and then the starter kit. So the starter kit is basically a GitHub repo that you can clone that's got a number of options to it, right? They wanted all of the individual bits and pieces to work well together, be glued together so you can get started quickly. So they've got LitElement in there. They've got Redux in there because I think it is the de facto standard sort of state management framework for, across very many frameworks. It's got testing baked in, and it's got a whole bunch of utility helpers that are important for a framework to work effectively, like routing and some offline helpers and a whole bunch of really, really small things that you can then pick and choose which parts you want. Okay, so that's really, really useful. It has testing set up out of the box that you can just start with, using web component test to test all of the web component functionality in isolation, and using Chrome Puppeteer for integration testing, including the screenshot testing and so on and so forth. And then the final part, I suppose, is that it has a number of sample applications. So it comes with one out of the box, which I'll show you in a second. And then it comes with a whole range that they've built to show how you would use these fundamental building blocks to build up something cool and meaningful. So it's a nice place to build off of, right? This is the simple default starter application that it comes with, which is a static page with 3 roots, one which has a really, really simple counter in it, and one that has a really, really simple like shopping cart thing. Okay? So showing this off just very briefly to show you how it fits together. Oh, and I didn't mention the purple server. Okay. So one of the patterns that they recommend is this idea of the purple pattern, so PRPL. So pushing critical assets on initial page load using H2, rendering the first page as quickly as possible, lazy loading as much as is not going to be used on that initial page load, and then pre-caching. I got the order mixed up. That was more like Perl. But you understand what I mean? And then pre-caching the balance, right? So that you can not hit the network next time you require it. And they've got that set up by default, which we'll look at a little bit further later. So the default code is really, really heavy because it isn't a full application to show you how it fits together. So the majority of the stuff sits in the source folder, and there are 3 folders underneath that: actions, components, and reducers. So in components, you can see all of the individual web components. So the primary containing app component that's got all of its bits and pieces in its own CSS. Because remember that with web components, the CSS gets wrapped inside Shadow DOM so that it's standalone, completely standalone, and can be used without fear of collision. And then underneath that, it's got all of the markup rendered and a whole bunch of stuff. We'll show how the Redux gets wired in later, but there's 2 other folders. So actions, primarily things that you can do, trigger for the Redux pipeline. I'm not a Redux expert. They're sitting in the second row, so you can ask them. And then you write a whole bunch of reducers, and the reducers are the things that actually do the work. So you've got the cyclical flow of data, which I think we'll unpack a little bit later. They've got all of the test stuff in here, so either the unit tests that are your web component test bits and pieces, and then your screenshots and integration testing using Chrome Puppeteer, which is really, really, really cool. So screenshot diffing between test runs is amazing. The last part, which I think we'll look at a lot later, is they've got some configuration and stuff set up for that purple server. So this is the lay of the land. But there's a lot here, and there's a lot to dig through. As you can see, like the class files are chunky, and they've got lots of detailed implementations. And I'm a minimalist, and I like starting from grassroots. And my way of viewing the world is by building to-do MVC applications for every framework I start with. It's just a kata that I go through that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I'm going to stick true to my word and build a to-do MVC application for you guys. I'm going to stop blah-blahing now. Right, so I have no actions. I've created a very, very simple reducer that's got a class for to-dos and a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't want to type out. I have a single app component that has been set up with just a bare minimum amount of markup inside a render method. And then I've got a whole bunch of shared styles because I wasn't going to type out CSS. So I'm just using the CSS imports that I'm going to write over here, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, and a whole bunch of hacky stuff that I'm not super proud of that we're not going to talk about too much. Okay. Right. So we've got this my app. This my app when we start it up, and let me just make sure to close that one. I don't need to start this one. I need to start this one. Okay. And all I've done is I've removed all of the other cruft that I don't care about from a component and Redux perspective. Okay? So if I go and take a look at this application now, local host, what was it? 8081. That makes some sense. 8081. Okay. It's just a little bit of markup that says to-dos and a whole bunch of templating stuff. Okay, so we're going to get started, and the first thing you need to do is to add a to-do. So to do that, I'm going to say this a lot. It gets old really, really quickly, I promise. To do that, we're going to create a new component called, add to-do.js. Okay, and now we need a bunch of stuff. So we're going to import the bits that we need. Okay, so we're going to import LitElement, and we're going to import a mixin called connect, and we're going to import our store, which is our Redux store that I'm not going to look at because it's a bunch of boilerplate code that I haven't bothered to dig through. And then we've got our shared styles that we're going to use. And these things are fundamentally just classes, right? So add to do is going to be a class that we use. And how this class gets its magic is by effectively extending LitElement. Extends LitElement as a base class. But now, And that works really, really well. But one of the nice things about, and I quite like the pattern about how the Polymer team has done this stuff, is that they use mix-ins to add additional functionality onto these base classes. So they've got the ability to call this connect mix-in, okay? And for this connect mix-in, you pass in the specific reference to the store, and that returns a function that you pass in the reference to whatever you want to use as your base class, okay? And it lets you then extend it, but it gives you a whole bunch of additional functionality. And the important part here is it gives you, firstly, a render method, and then a state changed method. And the state changed, it takes in the state, okay? The render method itself, in a very React-like way, takes in either props or one of the emergent patterns that they use very, very heavily that's quite cool, rather than just using one variable, is they use object destructuring to get individual pieces off of that prop, so you can be very explicit about what you're asking for, okay? And then the last thing you need to do is you need to define your custom element, and you're going to say window.customelements.define, and you're going to define your selector, which is going to be add to do in this case. Oopsie. I wasn't shouting, it's just caps lock. Add to do, and then you're going to say, well, for that custom element, I want to use this class. Okay, and that's relatively standard, and that's a custom element API, and most browsers have that. Most modern browsers have that out of the box now. Okay, so that's a good starting point. But inside here, we want to do some things. And the first thing we're going to have is we want to use the shared styles. And for those shared styles, we're going to simply just write, return HTML, which is going to be our rendering using LitHTML. And inside here, we're going to say, well, we want our shared styles, so we're just going to put them in there. Not in there, put them in the right place. Okay. Now we're writing those styles into this little piece of web component markup. And then under that, at the end of the day, we just want an input, right? So I'm going to use input dot, and I think it's new to do. Yep, my notes say so, so it must be true, which is just going to be text. And you'll see that I get syntax highlighting and auto-completion and so on and so forth, even though I'm writing HTML inside JavaScript, okay? Differently to React, though, this stuff is running in the browser. It's platform native. The additional stuff that I need here is I'm going to just add a placeholder because my notes tell me to. What is up? And then I'm going to autofocus it because that's going to make my life easier later on. Okay? And then I want to add an event now onto this thing. Okay? And we're going to key up off of the onKeyUp event. Keep key up. OnKeyUp event. And what I'm going to do is now inside that attribute, I'm just going to break into JavaScript again and return this dot add to do. And that's just going to be a function reference that exists on the class. Okay? So that's just going to be an instance method called add to do. And it's going to take the E, which is the event args, and then inside here it's going to do a bunch of stuff. Now, importantly, by convention, you'll see that all of these methods are prefixed by underscores. That is just a convention because JavaScript out of the box doesn't have anything that has an understanding of private. So the underscore is a visual cue to say, well, if you're accessing something on a different object and it's got an underscore, don't touch it because that's private state and unpredictable. So it's just a bit of discipline. Okay, now in here, the first thing that's going to happen is I'm going to try and limit it to only be on enter. So type a bit of text and hit enter. So I'm going to go e.key. If the key is not equal to enter, then I'm going to return. And failing that, I want to add the to-do. And after that, I'm going to update the text. So e.target.value equals empty string to reset it. Okay? Now to add the to-do, I need to send off an action for Redux to deal with, right? So I'm going to create my first action, which is going to be add-todo.js. Now you'll forgive me, I wasn't going to type this up over and over, so I've created a little snippet to create an action. So the first thing is that I need a variable, a constant variable that's going to be my key that that I'm going to use elsewhere, and that's going to be add to do. I'm going to export a creator function, which is going to be add to do, and then the last thing I'm going to do is pass in to do text, I believe it is. And we're just going to create a new anonymous object, and this is going to set to do text colon to do text as a property on that thing. Okay. Stop if you have questions. And then in my component here, I'm going to dispatch that. So I'm going to use the store.dispatch, and that's going to dispatch add to do, yes, add to do method, and inside there I'm going to pass in e.target.value. Okay, and it has imported it at the top there. Thank you, Visual Studio Code. Great, so that's the one side of it, and now I need to respond to it in the reducer to be able to actually action the state. So the reducer has a whole bunch of stuff in it. This is probably all going to be an anti-pattern because I'm not very experienced with Redux, but don't judge me, okay? Or you can judge me afterwards. So we've got a class, a simple class, we've got a whole bunch of default state, and this is where I'm just going to smash all of these actions into. So I'm going to create sorry? Oh, thank you very much, Jerry. Okay. That's what teamies are for. Okay, and this is simply just going to do, I promise I can type. This is simply going to do a shallow copy of the state, and it's going to, at the end of it, append on a new to-do and pass in the action dot to-do text, I believe. No. Okay, and just create a new state array, right? And that's going to write it into the state, and everything that's subscribed to it is going to get that. We're not going to be able to see anything off of this, right? Because we can only then create and add things into a void. We need to then show this stuff. So we're going to go back to my app here. Oh wait, we need to do one more thing. So my app is just a bunch of plain markup that doesn't actually use that custom element that we've defined. So for that, we need to do two things here. So firstly, we need to add it into the right part of the page. To do, and we need to import that component so that the code gets triggered. So this, I'm not sure how I feel about it, but in JavaScript, this is called an import with side effects. So I'm importing that module. I'm not using anything that that module exports, which in this case is actually nothing, but I'm getting it to run code. So that's going to define the custom element, and I'm going to use that custom element locally. So it's unfortunately just one of the things. There might be other ways to do this. And that's going to add it to the page. And then very similarly, I'm now going to scratch out another to-do list component that I'm going to create now. And then I'm going to import to-do list at the top. So for that component, I'm now going to create it, create new component, to-do list.js. And I'm not going to type out all of that stuff individually. I've also created a little snippet that's going to create the pieces that I need, which we've taken a look at, barring one. So this is going to be a to-do list class, and at the bottom there, it's going to be exported as a to-do list element. Okay. Now, it's got the render and state change method already implemented, and it's also got the static get properties. Okay. That properties getter is the bits that Polymer is adding onto LitElement, where it then lets you speak across web components and manages those changes. So inside here, I'm going to say, well, the thing that I've got is I've got an to-dos, an array of to-dos, and for those, I am going to, inside here, get the this.todos, which points at the same thing, but fetch it off of the state. That is right. Let me just check my notes. Yeah, close enough. Okay, and now I can use those things. Now, importantly, I can, as a part of the props destructor, just say I'm looking for to-dos on whatever that props object is, and it will be passed in, and then just use it internally. So now I can just go and say, well, to-dos dot map, and then each of those is going to be a to-do, and this is just all plain JavaScript, and inside here I want to now render a sub-item. So for that I'm just going to go straight back into lit, and I'm going to render simple, I forgot the outer UL dot to-do list. And then inside here, I'm going to create a list item, and inside that list item, I'm just going to put the to-do title, just so we can show some stuff. Okay, that should be everything. Now if I refresh this, I get all of the default to-dos that I've added as a part of the state, and I should have the ability to, this is a test, add a to-do onto the end there. Okay, it just adds it onto the state, which is pretty cool, but it looks fugly. So this is very bare bones, and what we're going to do next is we're going to create a component that represents its view state. Lots of little independent components, right? So inside this list item, we're not going to just render to-do.title, we're instead going to render view to-do. Trying to type as little as possible. Okay, and inside view to-do, I'm going to set a custom property, which is going to be to-do, and I'm going to set that to this reference of to-do that I've got inside the map. Okay. I need to import with side effects at the top here, so I'm going to import. What was that? View to do. View to do when it gets there. Cool. So I'm going to create the view to do component. I'm going to just use my component shortcut for view to do, and view to do is going to be the element. Now inside here, I'm going to use that same property array. If you remember, I said the property was going to be to-do. Well, not array, but property getter. And I'm going to set it to type object. That's going to be passed in. I'm not going to use the state change for the moment. No, I'm not going to use the state change for the moment, and rather just render what this needs to look like. Okay. And inside here, I'm going to create a div.view. Inside that div.view, we're going to have three things. So the first thing we're going to have is we're going to have an input of class toggle that is going to be a checkbox. Then we are going to have a label, ignoring the for, that's going to have our to-do.title in it. And our to-do is going to be passed in here as a part of the props object. So the properties are speaking straight to the props of the render, which is pretty cool. And then the last thing I'm going to do is add a button of type of class destroy that I'm going to use a little bit later. Okay. So now if I have all of those three things and I reload, what did I forget? Yes, that's what I forgot. Remember I told you about the hacky CSS, right? That I wasn't proud of? This is where that comes in. We're just going to import that one and not ask any questions. And there we can see it looks a little bit tidy, right? Now, that's awesome. So we can add a to-do, we list to-dos, we can view to-dos, and now we want to complete them. So for that, we're going to put an event on top of our input. Yes, and we're going to do two things. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create an on-click event, and then we're going to set checked. Okay? So we can respond to the data. And when we set checked, we're going to set it to to-do.completed, and that's all good and well. But our on-click, we care about this. So previously, when we passed it the function reference, this was the reference to that function, right? Because of how that works in JavaScript. If we care about this, in terms of it being this class, we have to use an anonymous function, right? Because the anonymous function has something called a lexical this, which means that it copies the this from wherever it gets created in. Now, how that looks is just as follows. We're just going to create a fat arrow function, and the fat arrow function is going to call this dot underscore toggle completion. Okay? That looks familiar to people, right? And that's just going to be an instance function on here called toggle completion. I don't care about the E in this case, and I'm just going to dispatch an action that's going to toggle completion. So we're going to create a new action called toggle completion.js, and inside here, toggle completion and toggle completion. Okay. The last thing we need is we need to pass through an instance that we're going to toggle. So we're going to pass through to do, and to do will just be created on that object. So here we can now go store.dispatch, toggle completion please have updated. No, IntelliSense hasn't updated yet, so I'll do it by hand, and we want this dot to do. We should probably, and I'm just showing you so that you can see how it would work if you care about local this, but to be pure and far more functional, you would want to pass in to do, because then you've got that consistent flow and you're not relying on any of the internal state. But it's just a 45-minute demo, so you can cut me some slack, right? All right, so toggle completion, I need to import it at the top here, which sucks. So import toggle completion from actions, toggle completion, and it's double dot, right? Double dot. Of course it's double dot. Okay, so that should work. Now in my reducer, I need to respond to that. So in here, I'm going to case toggle completion, and as a part of that, I now need to unfortunately do something a little bit more complicated. So we're going to return a map of the state, but on that map of the state, we're going to need to change some stuff, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to try and find that particular element. So if item.id equals action.todo.id, then I want to return a shallow copy of it. So I'm going to unroll item, but I also want to override some stuff. So I'm going to override completed to not item.completed. Does that make sense? So even though this has a completed property, this is just going to overwrite. It's a nice little bit of shorthand that you might be used to from other things. And then lastly, we're going to return state, because otherwise weird things are going to happen and I'm going to get confused. And that should just work, right? Barring one thing. So we also want to, yes. We also want to change the label so that the label has a strike through.
What do you return state in your map function? I'm just reading that.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Hey, awesome. I owe you a high five. Return item, not state. Thanks for paying attention. Okay, where was I? Strike through. Okay, so we want to do conditional CSS. Now the reason why I'm bringing this up is because conditional CSS has a specific challenge. So we're going to let completed CSS equal to to-do.completed, and if it's completed, I'm just going to specify a ternary. Then we want the class to be completed. Otherwise, we want it to be incomplete. Okay. Now you would think that on this label, you could just go class equals completed CSS, right? Because all of the other attributes work like that. But you'd be wrong. And you'd be wrong for a very specific reason that the React people are probably smiling internally at, because class is a loaded term, and it should always have been a reserved keyword in JavaScript, and it now is. And it gets used for meta programming, right? So, well, okay, ignore that part. But if you're looking at HTML element, right? An HTML element, if it has a class property, that could be confusing as to whether it's talking about the class of HTML element, the CSS class, or a reserved word keyword. So they changed that and they made it class name, which is what you would use in React, right? So this won't work, but you can use class name, completely fine. If there are collisions like this, you can also additionally use class $, which is a shortcut in LitHTML saying this is class, but it's the element, the HTML element part of class, not the JavaScript HTML element part of class. Does that make sense? It doesn't make sense. Okay, I see people nodding, so I'm assuming my butchered explanation is even vaguely close. So hopefully what that means is that if we reload now, just too late, Jared. We're just in time. Okay, so we see them all ticked, we see them all struck through, and hopefully we can complete one, and uncomplete one. So yeah, cool, complete a to-do done. So next we're going to move on to remove a to-do, which is a little bit easier. So we're just going to use, again, the onClick event on button, and we're going to also specify, slow down, also specify a fat arrow function, and in this we're going to go this dot underscore remove to do. Okay, we're going to create the remove to do class, and we're going to want to dispatch something there. That's relatively straightforward. We're just going to create another action called remove to do. I'm going to create an action here, remove to do, remove to do, and it's going to just pass through to do. No, yes, okay. So in our view to do component, we can now store.dispatch remove to do, yay, IntelliSense is fast enough, and pass through this dot to do. Cool. Ironically, this is a lot easier inside our reducer, because inside this part, remove to do, we can then just use a filter. So we can return state.filter and filter on x.id not equal to action.todo.id. Right? Okay, so we're just omitting it and then it's falling away. And that hopefully means, yes, that hopefully means that we can then create, reload, create our rubbish, delete our rubbish, and then delete everything else as well, because why not? Okay, awesome. The last thing we have to do is we need to be able to edit and update that to do. So for that, we're going to start off with, and this is quite a long one, we're going to start off with the view component. We're going to, when you double click on label, let you edit it. So for that, we're going to use the onDoubleClick method, and we're going to pass it to E, and this dot edit to do. Yeah, has to look pretty. Edit to do, and then when we edit the to do here, we're going to just want to dispatch that. So I'm going to create a small action again, building with lots of small things. Edit to do, edit to do, no, yes, and that's just going to pass in the to do, that's going to be edited. So I'm passing through some big objects. I could possibly just pass around the ID. That might make a lot more sense. I don't know what the best practice is. We can chat about that just now. And then here we can go store.dispatch, edit to do, no, and use this dot to do as the thing that we're passing it. We need to import it at the top here, edit, edit, and then inside our reducer, this is going to look very similarly to the toggle completion one. So the first thing we're going to do is case edit to do, and then copy that, copy the right stuff hopefully, and instead going to change editing to true. There's a lot of duplication here. There's definite candidates for refactoring. I'm just going to leave it because I'm super lazy. Sorry. Okay, so that's going to set editing and that's going to work, but now we need to do the other side of it, right? The actual edit component functionality itself. So for that, we're going to, if we look at our to-do list, we've got this view to do. We're going to put an edit to do next to it in exactly the same fashion. We're going to also import that edit to do up here. And then we're going to create an edit to do component. Edit to do.js. Okay. Component, edit to do, edit to do. Okay, it's going to then take in to do, which is going to be an object. I'm in the right place. Yes. And at the end, at its core, this is just going to be an input, right? So it's going to be an input of type or of class edit. Text is fine, and it's just going to have the value set, and the value is going to be set to do.title. Okay. We're going to pass through to do over there. And then importantly, we need to get the right thing inside the state change event. So because I'm going to need it later on, I'm going to write one piece of code that's just going to, if the to-do is null or undefined, return. Otherwise, things are going to break later on. Thank you. Thank you. High five for you too. Front row is attentive. Hey. The left-hand side of the front row. You guys need to sharpen your game. I'm watching you. Okay, and then we can specify. That's true. You do have an unfair advantage. This dot to do is equal to state dot to do's dot find, and we're going to find where x dot id equals this dot to do dot id. Probably an awful pattern, but couldn't figure out another way to do it, so I'm open to suggestions. Okay, so we're going to load that. We've got it set, and then custom element defined. We want to bind onto two events here, right? So we're going to use the onBlur event and the onKeyUp event. And on the onBlur event, we're going to use this dot onBlur and pass through E, and I've forgotten to wrap it in string interpolation bits and pieces. Yeah, and on this one, we're going to this dot onKeyUp E and create the two events here. So onBlur E onKeyUp. Okay. Now for those, I'm going to need two actions. I'm going to need a completed editing action and a cancel editing action. So up here, I'm just going to create the two of them. So for complete editing, action, complete editing, complete editing, and it's going to take in to do and updated to do text, okay, both of those. And then for cancel editing, it's going to be similar. All of these actions are really, really similar. Going to take in the to-do to cancel editing. And then on my component, if I go to take a look at the edit component, on blur, so when I click off, I want to complete editing. So that's just going to be store.dispatch complete editing, passing through this dot to-do and e.target.value. Okay. And on key up, I want to do two things. So I'm going to create a switch on e.key, and then I'm going to case enter. I'm going to do exactly this. I'm just going to take some shortcuts and copy and paste it because it's the same. And then on case escape, I'm going to do something very similar, except this is just going to be cancel editing, and it's just going to pass in this dot to do. So does it make sense? Okay. Nodding faces. Making sure I haven't missed anything. Now we need to write the reducer on the other end. Okay. So we've got two methods that we need to write. So firstly, case for complete editing. And for complete editing, it's going to be very similar to the edit, except firstly, that's going to be the opposite. And then secondly, it's going to set title to action.updated to do text. Okay. And then for cancel editing, it's going to just set editing to false. Okay. Now, this should work. However, when we reload it, you'll see that the page looks awful because it renders both of those components. Because we now need to elect to show and hide those pieces ourselves. Now, if we just simply return null from here, for example's sake, it's going to break that rendering pipeline. So what we actually want to do is return some empty marker, so that it will remove it explicitly. Okay. So for that, luckily it's not there. Damn it, not there. Yeah. So if to do .editing, then all we want to do at the top is return an empty HTML, and on edit, if it's not to do .editing, we want to return the empty HTML. There might be other ways to do this, but that's what works for me. All right, so now if we load this, we should be able to double-click an editor to do. OnKeyUp is not a function. Okay. OnKeyUp. Yes. Underscore OnKeyUp. My first row is letting me down. You had so much promise. Okay, so now if I double-click, I can edit and update. And it throws a warning, but I'm going to ignore that warning for the moment, so don't look there. Avert your eyes, and then we can edit a whole bunch of stuff. What did we break? I broke something. Just delete that one quickly before anyone notices. Just delete everything. Okay, cool. So we've at least got some functionality. Now, I think it's a small app, right? It's something very, very simple, but we've created 4 or 5 components with a bit of interaction. So it shows some non-trivial bits and pieces. The Redux stuff is heavy-handed for this kind of thing, but it scales relatively linearly with large systems. So this doesn't change when you have hundreds of components. Okay. So I want to show you the build bits and pieces quickly, just because I haven't really built a progressive web app yet. That's just been an app. So it has the purple server stuff built in, but we want to change a couple things that I've left on purpose. So the first thing is the push manifest that came by default specifies all of the routes and what to push down when those routes get accessed. And we really don't care about any of this stuff because we only have one route. I haven't used the router at all, and we don't have a myView1. Okay. What we do have, however, is we have two CSS files, external CSS files that we would need to update. So on our, and I've got it here in the polymer-cli, conveniently still selected. I think I selected that at 4 this morning. And then over here, when the copying and pasting goes wrong, you know you've got a problem, right? So we're going to just get the to-do MVC base CSS. We're going to get the app CSS. We're going to fix our JSON. And we're going to change these to style. The rest is just our app bundle and the scripts for the web component loader. The other thing we need to do is fix our service worker config. Now, if you take a look at our pre-cache config, this is the thing that is going to generate all of our pre-cache data for our progressive web app. It's good by default, if a little bit aggressive. So it's literally pre-caching all of your files. You know, that's a potential question mark. You might want to tweak that. But either way, all we want to do is we want to make sure that it'll also pre-cache those two CSS things for us out of the box. And I'm just going to make sure that it's looking for anything to do MVC. So if it matches a URL that has that in it, it's going to pre-cache it, which will be sent through on H2 push. So if I cancel this, and I now go npm run bold : purple server, it will compile a whole bunch of stuff. Now, the important thing, or the interesting thing, is that it's generating target CS or target JS for a whole bunch of environments. So it's got environments where ES6 is supported, but not modules. It's got a fallback ES5, and then it's got an ESM, so if you're supporting ES modules and classes and all of the other JavaScript bits and pieces. The reason it does that is because then it can push less JavaScript, because it has to push less polyfill. Okay. The next thing we can do is we can just run serve. And if we run serve, it's just going to start up a little purple server using Node.js. And if I start a fresh incognito window, just so that the service worker is fresh, localhost, 8080. We'll see there's our application. Additionally, we can look at the application tab, and we can see our service worker installed and running. We can see our cache storage with our pre-cache bits and pieces already there. And if we go back to the network panel and reload the page, we'll see that everything gets served first and foremost from service worker. Can you all see that? From service worker. And then it hits the network. And what that means is I can do, damn it, the screen's too small. So just got to zoom out a little bit so I can see the offline button. So we can take this offline. The app still reloads completely. The service worker throws errors, but the rest of the app is fine. And importantly, we can still use the app completely effectively even while offline. So we've got what? Offline. Oops. So that's what that was, double enter. I'm not sure. Okay, so perhaps the last thing I'll show you, and then we can field some questions, is the progressive web appiness. So you might not, who has played with Lighthouse before? Okay, baked into Chrome. It's just been updated recently. I'm going to run audits on performance and progressive web apps, so it's a teeny bit faster. And unless it lets me down, if anyone has any questions, we can ask while it's running. So you can see we get a near perfect score on performance and a very good score for progressive web happiness. And there are some individual bits and pieces that we can change. Some of this is where we're running Purple server on local, and some of it is just time to interactive because I've been super lazy with those massive CSS files that I've imported, right? Again, on the network panel, I think you can see, if we go back online, now because everything is pre-cached, it's downloading 7 kilobytes for this page. And if we clear, oops, not that one. If we clear the caches, it's going to take me a while, but if we clear the caches, then, okay, ignore that. You can trust me on this one, as it ends up being about 50 kilobytes all in the entire application. And I've been super, super wasteful here. I'm including big external style sheets, and I'm not necessarily optimizing my code. Now the difference is that a lot of frameworks, the whole framework is more than 50 kilobytes. And I think if you're really aggressive with lit particularly, you can make it really, really lean and really small. So I think that's it. I'm happy to take questions. This stuff is pretty cool. And if you have any other discussions or questions or just want a great place to ask people in the community, we're all, a lot of us, very active on ZA Tech Slack channels. We're happy to sign on and ask us any questions that you have. Anything? Thank you very much, Julie. Useful, interesting, boring?
Interesting, very interesting. So could you replace React with this?
It's not a straight swap, obviously.
Yeah.
I think going Preact is probably a better first step for React, but the idea is that React will never run natively in browser. It will never get rid of that transpile step, whereas this stuff is largely native, and the better web components get, the better this is. So who knows the Google Material Design components? Those are all built using Lit and Polymer. So the new ones, the material theming stuff. And there's a whole additional world as to why you would want to go this and why everything's, maybe not everything's going to go this, but there's a lot of investment in this stuff. So one of the things that the Polymer project is focusing on is this problem is something that every single JavaScript framework tries to reinvent the wheel. How do I efficiently update a DOM template with data? So that's really the kind of thing that we should have a platform way, a native way of doing it that's hyper efficient. And that's one of the things that they're busy trying to push towards. And they're working actually really closely with the Angular team in this. They've got them on board and they're trying to figure it out. I think it's HTML template parts. But if I'm wrong, I'm really sorry. HTML parts, something along those lines. No. I'll find it. If anyone's interested. So that's pretty cool, and there's stuff like that coming down the way. Shadow DOM is reaching maturity. It's very cool, and it's a good way of building reusable components where your styling then is encapsulated, and you can specifically expose things using CSS properties, which are also just mature and stable now.
So what kind of server support, what kind of browser support is that for this?
So the Polymer stuff, the Polymer 3 bits, are the ones that really care about browser support, and those are, I think they definitely support IE11, and they run natively in a lot of the modern browsers that support web components. So it's got very, very good support for legacy browsers. Nothing's going to help you with IE8, I'm sorry. And obviously it'll just get better going on. The lit stuff, I mean, I think is probably polyfill for older browsers, but I don't know that it makes sense if you've got a predominantly older browser base, because then you don't get the good performance out of it. So I know they're nervous of sharing benchmarking data, because that is very much a shot across the bow, and how you benchmark is always a challenge, but they compare very favorably to the fastest frameworks, faster than most of the standard ones. Interpret that as you will.
Generally, I find writing the code is sort of harder than the performance part of it. Like, I don't really get into performance hits.
until you get performance hits.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the sad part.
So when you get performance hits and you've prioritized code and code aesthetics, then it becomes a big problem to fix because you have to throw all of that away and rewrite, basically. So it's nice to have something that's got some reasonable aesthetics and reasonable defaults that is also fast.
Yeah.
Which is what I think makes the React or Preact relationship so good. That makes sense. Okay, cool. Well, thanks a lot for coming. Here, if you have any questions, I might still be there. We've got some cool speakers next month. We were supposed to have web audio stuff, which unfortunately didn't happen for a whole bunch of external reasons. And I think next month, yeah, we've got some cool WebAssembly. Is it WebAssembly? Maybe? Maybe some WebAssembly stuff. And what's Redwana doing? We don't know. There's cool stuff other way. We promise we've got speakers next month. You don't have to listen to me again.
Those you listen to.